Everybody ready?
Ready.
Call to order the March 4th, 2020 Board of Commission special meeting. Please silence cell phones, pagers, and other electronic communication devices, and agendas are located at the back of the chambers. First, we'll have a moment of silent reflection by Commissioner LaCroix. Will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we'll have a review and approval of the agenda, please. Motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Drew, second by DeSanto. Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll have the presentation from Compensation and Classification Study of Pennington County, South Dakota by Mr. Mark Goldberg, Gallagher Benefits Services Incorporated.
Good morning, Commissioners. John Morrow, Pennington County Human Resources. So today we've invited Mr. Goldberg from Gallagher to present to us the information that they've gathered as they've gone through this compensation review and then the proposals for us to consider as we move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Goldberg.
So just a question. So when we're going through the presentation, can they ask questions per slide or you want them all at the end?
What we'd like to do, if possible, although there's a lot of slides to get through, and Mark's going to do his best to keep that moving, is to hold questions from the audience until the end. If there are certain things you need clarification on, though, on the dais during the presentation, feel free to ask him those.
Okay, because for me, it's easier when I'm at the slide to ask a question, and then you're saying at the end if we have people in the audience that want to ask questions too?
Yes, ma'am, if
Okay.
that would work.
Okay, does everybody get that then? Okay, so you're allowed to ask questions at the end. Write down some of your questions for Mr. Goldberg, for our staff and people watching, and we really appreciate everybody coming today, so they're kind of going through this presentation and hope we have a little bit better understanding at the end of this, so thank you. I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Thank you so much for having me here. So we have a lot to go through. I will tell you, John already knows this. You guys have set the record on the longest presentation I've ever done. So we're not going to go through all 108 slides or something like that, but I'm going to try to hit as much as I can within the time we have allotted. So just very, very quickly about Gallagher. We've been doing this for over 35 years. This is really all we do is public sector compensation. About 90% of my work is this. I do a little bit of executive comp work, but cities, counties, states, colleges, universities, this is really our focus, is designing compensation and classification plans for organizations just like this. So what were we trying to do with this? Really, in the end, what we're trying to do is come up with a system that makes sense for the county, and really to put in place a compensation and classification scheme that is internally equitable and externally competitive, to make sure that positions that maybe they're doing different work within the county, but the level of complexity of the work, the type of decisions that are made, if they're all at the same level, those jobs should be in the same salary range. Not necessarily paid the same because you have the whole range to work with, but everyone should be within the same salary grade. We did a number of different salary structures. We'll talk about some of the options that we provided, but there's a number of different options that we went through and costed. So 4 different structures, 8 different costing options. And what I want to do in just a few slides is talk a little bit about how we evaluated these jobs, and then we're going to go through the custom survey that we did and the market data that we collected to figure out what the market is for these positions. But in the end, what we're trying to do is make sure all the jobs are classified appropriately. As I said, we're evaluating these jobs and saying, you know what, internally this all makes sense. Not just within one particular area, let's say maintenance, but okay, this job in maintenance is different than this job over in the auditor's office. But when we look at it internally, yeah, there's a hierarchy that makes sense within maintenance, but when we look at it across the county, these jobs are comparable, so they should be in the same salary range. We're not here to reduce pay. We're not here to reduce positions. We're not doing an organizational structure. I can tell you definitively, no one lost pay. There was no one, and I would never, ever recommend that an organization reduces an employee's pay because honestly, that's toxic to an organization. So that is not something that was done and is not part of the costing. So a couple phases behind this. First was talking with leadership, talking with HR to understand what the scope is currently, what's working, what's not working, and go through some policies and procedures. Then we went through the internal analysis. We gathered updated job descriptions, reviewed them, talked with HR around, what does this say? What does this, let's take a look at this. And we evaluated all of these jobs. Each one of the descriptions that was sent in was read at least twice, sometimes more than that. And then we evaluated the jobs using our proprietary method. And I'll go through that in just a few minutes. Then we went through the comp survey. We talked about, what questions do we want to ask, what additional information other than other than compensation do we want to ask, what benefits questions are appropriate, gather that information, put together a pay structure based on both the internal and the external data that we gathered, and now we're here doing the final presentation. So what we're looking to do eventually is to figure out what kind of salary structure makes sense. There's a number of models we'll kind of go over, at least at a high level, but there's a number of different ways we can approach this. And then figure out what do we want to do from a costing option? What makes the most sense from a costing perspective? And then how quickly do we want employees to move through the salary range? What do we want to do with adjusting the salary structures? A lot of times every 3 to 5 years is pretty common. The best practice is about every 2 to 3 years. I have one client that adjusts their salary structure every year. That is very rare, but I do have one that does it. But if you adjust it every 2 to 3 years, that is probably your best, that is the best practice. And then we'll talk about some pay management guidelines. I know there's some questions around how we want to approach that. And that means hiring and job, comp changes and how often those job descriptions should be updated. And there's usually a variance within my clients. And of course, to make sure that there's communication. So when looking at that salary structure, generally you're looking at between a 2 and 2.5% increase. And that's different from when employee salaries move. The general compensation theory says you want to have that structure move anywhere from 0.5% to 1% lower than what the general salary increase is. So if general salary increases are about 3%, let's say, you'd want to have that salary structure move anywhere from 2 to 2.5%. And we are looking at roughly general salary increases of around 3% this year across the nation. That's not specific to South Dakota, that is nation. But most times, every 2 to 3 years, people adjust it if you want to be best in class. But realistically, 3 to 5 years is where most of my clients do it. So currently, everyone is brought in at step 1. That is not a best practice. We can have some discussion, and we've already had some discussions already around where can people be brought in at. Perhaps you've got a salary range that goes from $14 all the way up to $25. Okay, where do you want to bring that employee in? If you're hiring someone who's really, really good, has a ton of experience, are you going to bring that person in at $14 an hour? Probably not. Probably not going to be able to get that person. But you would have the whole salary range to look at, and we'll show you in just a little bit what the salary range looks like and how we defined it, really. But don't assume you need to bring someone in right at the salary range minimum. Use the whole salary range because the whole salary range is market competitive. Communication, make sure that everything is open and honest, which honestly the county's done a great job with. But to communicate to employees, here, if there's changes, here's what kind of changes are going to happen, here's how it's going to affect you personally, and make sure that those messages are really drafted to your particular audience. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, whether it's employee memos, putting things from the commission on on a website, sending out group emails. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Don't see a lot of people use paycheck and envelope inserts because not that many people get paychecks, hard paychecks anymore, but it is still used in some places. So with the feedback, just make sure that you're getting unsolicited and solicited feedback. By solicited meaning you're really going and asking, getting information specifically. Unsolicited is just, stuff that's coming to you just generally. Kind of went over that. All right, let's go into some of the details behind this. So when I'm talking about job evaluation, what do I mean? Any organization has some way of setting up a hierarchy. You're going to say, here's kind of the ranking of these jobs within our particular functional area, whether it's maintenance or state attorney's office. How are you going to rank those jobs? What we use is called the decision band method. Other organizations do different things. If you're in the private sector, about 90% of the private sector uses market pricing. I have half of my experience in my career within the private sector, and I've done a lot of market pricing. The truth is, market pricing in the private sector isn't how it really should be done. By this I mean, let's say you've got an accountant, and that accountant position's market is $45,000, and that puts it at grade X. Okay, well, let's say there's a flood of people in the market for accountants, and suddenly, because there's a lot more people that are entering it, that market rate drops from $45,000 down to $42,000. And maybe that might align it better with grade Y. You're not generally, I've never experienced it where someone drops a salary grade. You're keeping that person where they are. Well, then you're paying them above market. That's not market pricing, because market pricing says people could move up or down, but nobody ever moves down. They only move up. So that's one example of a job evaluation methodology. Point factor systems, which you currently have with Condry, is another way, where you have a number of different factors within a system and then degrees within that. And what I have experienced, because I'm trained in what's called the Hay evaluation method, which is a point factor system. You can manipulate those grades by saying, oh, you know what, if I push a couple of these educational requirements up or complexity up, just a couple of different degrees within it, then you move up a little bit more, and you can move someone up a grade. What we're finding is the decision band method is a lot more effective. For this reason, it's harder to cheat it. You can say, here's what the job is, here's the decisions that are made in this job. What DBM says is every job has to make decisions, from the board chair to a custodian, and you can measure those decisions and quantify those decisions. And if those decisions change, okay, well then the job is a little bit different. If those duties are different, then the job is really different. But that's how we approach it, and that's the methodology that we use behind it. So we did use DBM for every job where we receive job descriptions. We assigned grades for all that, and we really tried to look not just within a functional area, but across the county and make sure that everything worked both vertically within a functional area and horizontally across the organization. We did also use market data. I'm going to get to how we got that in just a minute. We aged everything to January 1st. What that means is the data might have come in October. Let's say, we also use some surveys, and these surveys come in over the course of the year. Mercer usually comes in June. ERI, Economic Research Institute, comes in like February, March. Salaries change over the course of the year, so we age everything to a common date. In this case, January 1st, 2020. This just kind of goes through a little bit of what I said with DBM. So one thing I do want to emphasize with this, performance is not a factor within it. How long a person's been doing the job is not a factor within DBM. What it says is, let's look at decision making. Let's look at the duties that are inherent within the job. That's it. Nothing else. I was talking with the chairwoman just before this meeting, going over this at a high level. There's a lot to this, and DBM is not the simplest system, honestly. It's a very, very effective system, but I have done hours and hours of training with the HR team here. I've actually spoken with a number of the elected officials to kind of go through things on this. But at a high level, I just want you to understand generally the methodology behind this. And the first step is to place these jobs, these duties in a band. So, for example, let's talk about an apprentice maintenance worker. We were looking at those duties this morning, actually, and went through all the duties that were listed there and said, okay, this duty would be an A1. Why? Because it's fairly well defined. This duty could potentially be a B band. Okay, well, if it is, that's because there is some discretion involved, not to the level where it would be exempt, but they make some determination of how and when to perform the steps in the process. Things aren't completely defined. Okay, there's a possibility there that it's a B band job or B band duty, and look at each one of the duties that are listed there. Bands A and B are non-exempt. C, D, E, and F are all exempt. Band C positions are professional and managerial. There's independence and judgment on matters of significance to the organization. That's actually the definition of an exempt status within the actual within the regulation.
Okay, let me stop you for a sec. Does
Yes, ma'am.
everybody, does the board understand the first part of this is about the band? Of how they get that band level, meaning based on determine maneuver and speed to perform defined steps of any operation, band A, all the way to band F, which is us. Because we're gonna go through band, grade, and subgrade, and if you don't understand each one of those and how you get there, then we're not gonna understand where we're going, is a good way to put it. So if anybody asks you questions, you understand what each of those mean. So if you have any questions, it'd be time to ask him if you're not getting the band.
For clarity, you might just want to take the actual jobs that are out there and say this would be band A in this example. So give us some real life examples.
Sure.
Okay,
So the type of jobs that are in Band A, you would have a custodian type position, a food service worker. Those are pretty well defined jobs that are in Band A. Band B, those are admin assistants, trades positions. There's a wide variety of jobs that are in Band B.
how about, can you kind of place some of the jobs that we have in those bands? I mean,
Actual jobs.
yes, that we have in Pennington County, so we can kind of understand which, because we know we're Band F, we know the department heads are elected officials are Band E, and then D is the non-elected, right?
D are your general department heads, kind of in
yes.
charge of a functional area.
So the A, B, and C would probably be the, if I'm correct, commission would probably be the most confusing where you're putting some of our people.
Again, I can talk in generalities. I can, if you wanted to, I can pull up where all the grades are, but that would be a fairly long list that I'd have
Yeah,
here.
just, well, you don't have to do the whole list, just examples of some of
Yep.
what would be like what we were doing on the dais earlier is, I
Yep.
said, okay, Lloyd's just starting, he would be A1.
But it's not that he's just starting. It's the duties that he would have there.
Okay,
That determines what the band grade and subgrade
well,
are.
that's, I'm sorry. So if he was an A and he was just starting, his grade would be 1, right?
Well,
A1.
It's the duties that he's doing. So it's
Okay.
not whether you're whether you're just starting or your level of experience does not affect the subgrade. So the band says, okay, what's the type of duties that are there? So admin assistant 2 is a B band.
Right.
Custodian positions are an A band.
Okay,
These are the types of positions that are there. C band employees, you'll have your developers, financial analysts, HR generalists. Those are band C positions, as well as managers. And I'll get to where there's a difference between managers within there. But those are the type of positions, professional level and managerial level, that are in band C.
basically supervisors are C.
Well, it depends on who you're supervising, honestly. We did. I will do that. So currently, what we're looking at within maintenance, Joe and I were talking this morning around this. Currently, what he's looking at for an apprentice position, the apprentice maintenance worker, is an A13. The reason why is because it's fairly well defined. Whether or not they're working on heavy machinery could make a difference if they're an A13 or a B21.
So basically he's A because he has to determine manner and speed to perform defined steps
Right.
of operation. And then he'd be a what?
Well, the question is a B21.
Okay, so he'd be a B.
Well, if you know, and that's something, you know, we're gonna, currently it's an A13. And it's an A13 because it's fair, when I looked at it, it was fairly well defined. And we went through all of the duties that are listed there. And there were one or two of them where it was borderline.
So,
So
so it'd be an A because of what?
it's an A because the duties that are performed are fairly routine and there's processes laid out. They can determine how and when to do things. Or excuse me, they can determine the speed in which stuff happens, but not much else. Everything's fairly well laid out for them.
Okay, and his grade because,
That's a good question. So the grade going to that is, are they managing anyone in the same grade as them, the same band as them? So an A13, there is actually nothing else, you know, higher than that. So an A can only, you know, it's only an A1. A
Right.
B2 says, okay, you could still be supervising, but you'd only be supervising people the band below you. So B21 or B22 could still be supervising, but they're not supervising anyone in the B band. Someone who is a B3, B31, or B32, what that says is you have at least two people in the B band that report to you. So the grade says, are you managing people in the same band?
okay.
Okay, that one can get kind of tricky for people.
So basically depends, A, B, C depends on how many people you're managing.
No, ma'am. ABC, ABC,
Sorry.
nope. An ABC says, let's look at the duties and go through each one of the duties that are listed there.
Okay,
And it's the highest level duty. So even if there was one duty of 10 or 11 that was a B band and all the rest were at the A band, that job really should be in the B band if we're applying it on a pure method. Now, truthfully, if one of 10 is at the B band and all the rest are at A band, I would be going to HR and saying, do you want to, oh, thank you.
That's within the highway department.
Okay. Do you want to put this job at a B21 even though everything else is at the A band? And it could be, yes, we do. And that would make sense. But it could be, maybe this really isn't at an A, this isn't at a B band level, this should be the lower level. So flaggers, for example, they're currently in an A12 position within maintenance. Thank you, John. A heavy equipment mechanic currently
just a
is,
sec, Mark. Are
Yes,
you guys understanding this? Ron, are you getting it, or do you need a
Yeah,
little
if
bit
I
different?
understand it, for an example, the lowest level would be A.
yes.
And we use the janitor for an example.
Sure.
And so if I wanted a job, here's the janitor when I came in, but I had 10 years experience doing this for institutional type properties, then I wouldn't then I could actually be in band A, but go up to step 5.
Yeah, potentially. But you're not, you know, let's say it was an A12 job that we had it evaluated. If you have 10 years of experience, we're not going to move you from an A12 to an A13. We'd move you within the band and pay you more aggressively within the band. Yes, sir.
Right, we're on this same page.
And then what needs to be explained too is that if someone has more experience, there's a minimum and then a 50,
50th percentile, the
yes.
midpoint.
So you don't have to advertise at the minimum. When somebody comes in, you can advertise based on experience. You could,
Yes, ma'am.
so I don't think people were getting that. I have to start them at the minimum
No, not at
in
all.
order to hire or advertise because I can't hire anybody at that pay grade.
That's correct. And I'll
So-
get to in a few minutes how we set the structures.
Okay.
But yes, that's absolutely true. But that subgrade that's listed there, so we talked about the band and the grade. That subgrade says how complex is that job compared to others in the same band and grade. So it's not a B23, it's not a B31, it's B23, B31. So a B, you know, that subgrade, what it says is the median level is a 2 for those non-coordinating jobs.
Right.
A B22, excuse me, an A12, a B22, a C42, that's where most jobs should end up falling out. Some are going to be a little bit less complex and they'd receive a subgrade of 1. Some are going to be more complex and receive a subgrade of 3. And some are going to be super complex and receive a subgrade of 4 or 5. But a B24 and a B31 are actually the same salary range. What it says is once you're a B23, once you're, you know, got a fairly high level of complexity compared to others in the same band and grade, you can either go towards, well, you get even more complex in your job, and that might be a B24, or you're going towards supervision, and that's a B31. But internally, the county would view that salary range as the same because it's, you know, internally you say, you know, it's comparable. It's just you're either becoming more complex in your job or you're starting to manage people. Does that make sense? It's what we would call a dual career path.
Any questions?
Keep on trucking.
Okay.
Madam Chair, is this making sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, where are we at?
So comp strategy, this is something we've talked about a lot with leadership, is where do you want to pay? What is your overall goal behind this? Do you want to be at market, a little bit above, a little bit below? And those pay ranges should align with your overall strategy. So right now we have it at the 50th percentile of the market. Pretty comparable. And honestly, about 80% of my organizations do that. The ones that don't generally are in California, believe it or not. But that's almost always where it is. But those salary ranges, they can be constructed a lot of different ways. We have a number of options that we'll talk about within this. But when we're putting together salary ranges, we've been very, very creative at times on how we design some of these. I was talking earlier that those salary ranges, myself, I've done some that are as little as 18% from the minimum to the maximum. And I've done others that are 120% from the minimum to the maximum. Sometimes we've done things where, all right, the minimum is only 10% less than the midpoint, which is set at the 50th percentile of the market. And that maximum is 30, 40, 50% above. So it's what's called an unbound structure. We can design structures in a lot of different ways. And actually, we have for you guys already, have a lot of different structures. But know that you can be creative in how you approach this. But I'll get to in just a few minutes how those midpoints are set. But what's more important is making sure that there's an internal hierarchy and that makes sense for each functional area. One of the things we talked about a lot with maintenance this morning is, does the internal hierarchy make sense? How we graded these people? Does it flow appropriately? And we may need to make some adjustments to that. And that's okay. But is there an internal hierarchy that makes sense? And then okay, well, if we make a change here, how does that affect other places? And making sure that if we make a change in maintenance, it doesn't adversely affect us. Oh, well, that puts us out of alignment with this other position in IT or the auditor's office or something like that. So we want to make sure everything aligns, again, both vertically within a group and horizontally across the county. One question I sometimes get from my clients is, well, what's the difference between cost of labor and cost of living? So you guys have had COLA increases in the past. Okay, we're not actually looking at COLA within this. What we're saying is, what is the cost of labor within a particular market? So when we're gathering this information, let's say we're getting information from here, we're getting information from Fargo, we get information from a number of different areas. What we will do is normalize it to Rapid City. So we have tools that we can use to say, all right, we're getting information from across, let's say across the state of South Dakota, or we're getting some of our survey information might be from a published survey that is a number of states. What we will do is normalize all of that directly to Rapid City because we have tools that we can use to do that. But it's based on the cost of labor, saying what are you paying for an accountant or for a flagger or for whatever position here within Rapid City, not what is the cost of living, because people could live in different areas. And the cost of living in one area could be is probably going to be a little bit different than another one. So you say, what is the cost of labor? What is actually being paid in this area? Does that make sense? Yeah. And I kind of show an example up there about Hill City, how it's much lower cost of living.
Ask questions.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Ron.
No, it just says cost of living in Hill City is cheaper than Rapid City, which I would partly argue with,
Okay. Well,
especially housing.
but you understand the logic behind it, right?
Yep, I understand the demographics.
So when we're using this, what do we mean when we say data cuts? So when we're going to these published salary surveys, and we did pull information from a number of published salary surveys, like Willis Towers Watson and Mercer, we can get information, they provide information in a number of different ways. If we're looking for an admin assistant, we may not look nationally for that. We may just look right within this area, or we might look within public sector. That's what that means when we look at this. So if we're looking for a director of purchasing, for example, probably not just going to look in Rapid City. We might look nationally for it, or within a particular data cut, whether it's profit or nonprofit. But that's how we're gathering that information. All of that information was sent to HR, so you can see here's what all the data cuts we use for the jobs, and also the descriptions. Say, you know what, this is the description within the survey. Does this make sense for what match we used for this? So you have all that information. And like I said, sometimes you look nationally, sometimes you look locally. It depends on the job, honestly. But if you eventually, if you did want to look at that information and say, oh, this isn't an appropriate data cut, or maybe this job description doesn't exactly meet what we're looking at, then we can certainly look at making some changes to that. But that's how we approach all of this, and we have reviewed all that information with HR to make sure that all the data we used is an appropriate match. This just kind of goes towards the aging that I mentioned before. We did use the 3% aging factor, which is pretty common. Generally, we stick around 3%. In about 2008, 2009, we were using, honestly, about a 1% aging factor. But failing something like that, it's normally been about 3%. Usually anywhere from 2.5% to 3% is been pretty common for the last 5-6 years. So that survey that I mentioned, what did we do with this? We did put together the survey, and here's some of the things we were looking at. We didn't really include private, and we generally don't, because private organizations do not respond to custom surveys 95% of the time. The reason why is because they send in information to those published surveys that I mentioned to you. So we have the private sector information from those published surveys, but we didn't really look, I don't even think we included any within the custom. But we'll look at, hey, who are you losing people to, or where do you recruit people from? We're not going to look at Los Angeles County for you, but we might look at other cities or counties kind of in the area. That would make sense. So
Mark, can I stop you one second?
yes, of course, Commissioner.
My original understanding is that you were doing some comparisons, that you had purchased information to compare it to the private
We did.
industry.
We did publish salary surveys. Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me give you an example. So like for highways, are there employees, or is there any comparison as to what we're doing with county employees as compared to what the private sector is doing with those same kind of employees?
We did provide to HR, here's all the information, here's everything we used for the public sector, here's everything, or excuse me, for the custom survey, here's everything we used for the private survey. And in fact, within the custom survey, we had 40 positions that we listed. We ended up doing about 12, spoke with HR about, what positions would you want, that were not in the survey that you'd like to have us get private sector information on, and we pulled public salary survey data for those private sector, for those 12 positions. And if, for example, if we don't have 5 responses for a job, we can't tell you what it is. But if we had 4 responses for an accountant, let's say, we would pull in private sector information for that and say, here's what the total market is. We couldn't tell you what the custom survey says because we don't have enough data to really make a determination on that. But when we include private sector information, here's what the market is for those jobs.
Okay.
But we asked more within the custom survey, more than just what are you paying. We asked questions around how do people progress through the range? What are some benefits questions? How much are you paying for retirement? How much are you paying for health care? Some specific questions around some key issues that you guys wanted information to gather on. And we've got that data kind of towards the end of this.
Well, you are, and maybe Gary already asked this, so you are including what the benefits mean for an organization, meaning if I get paid $11 an hour plus benefits, does that make any difference or through organizations? Because I know a lot of people will come just because of benefits.
They do, and
on where.
Yep, and spoiler alert, towards the end we'll get to the benefits piece, and you guys are paying above market for benefits when we looked at that information, but that was not part of the structure itself. Okay. So there's the base salary piece, but we didn't say, you're paying $11 an hour for this job, but benefits count for $8 or $9. We didn't go to that level. We said, here's how much you're paying currently for health care or for retirement and things like that. Here's what we're seeing from the market, so you are above at below market for each one of these just discrete benefit components.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Yes, ma'am. So here's who we surveyed. And what you see in highlights, those are the ones who responded. So as you can see, we sent to a lot of places. And some did not respond, including some that honestly rather disappointed me because Stearns County, for example, Olmsted County, those are clients of ours. So the fact they didn't respond really doesn't make me happy, but we did get quite a few responses. Commissioners, would you think that that looks kind of like an appropriate data set to choose from to compare against for peer organizations?
But you have more, like you said, you have more organizations than this that you look at, right, through the market?
No, ma'am. This is the participant organizations that we send stuff to.
Right.
These are everyone that we send stuff to. Within the private, when we looked at the surveys, that's not going, I don't know who's going to respond to any of these surveys. It's not going to say, oh, it was City of Rochester applied for this job or this other one. I'm just going to know here's what the market is or the data cut that's used for an accountant position or admin assistant position, etc. But this is everyone who we surveyed, and here are the responses. And I do want to be clear on this. I can't tell you here's what Lincoln County did for this job. Here's what Lynn County did. Here's what Fargo said. I can't provide that type of granular information for you because when I collect this information as a third party, I am then bound by antitrust regulation. I cannot say here are the specific responses unless you go through and sign a specific waiver for that. And only one organization in the 5 years I've been doing this has ever actually signed that. I can't provide you here's what the specific responses were for each one of these places. I can provide you, as I have, here's what the market is, but not here's what Minnehaha County said.
So
Yes,
when you surveyed these and for the wages and so forth, so how did you compile the data? I mean, some may be way lower than others and so forth. So what'd you do? Just add them together and divide it by how many you got back?
That's a
That's
great
the
question.
average?
So when we look at the data, what we're going to say is we have to have at least 5 data points for a job. Let's say we got 8 data points for an accountant position. What we're going to look at is anything that's over 2 standard deviations away, we're going to flag. So if we had 6 respondents for an accountant job that were between 40 and 50,000, and one of them is paying 25,000, one of them is going to pay 80,000, we're going to follow up with those organizations. 90% of the time, they don't get back to us. So we usually will throw out, if they do, it's like, yeah, this was a good match, or no, it wasn't, then we'll make a decision around that. But often we'll throw out those 2 data points if we don't hear back from the organization because it's over 2 standard deviations away. But we will provide to HR, here's everything, here's the raw responses, and here is the more customized response, like, okay, when we trim the data, here's what it looks like.
So you let HR know that the range for that position that you've received back.
We do, we
and
blind the
why
information and say,
and so he could actually do a follow-up.
potentially,
They
yes.
might be able to.
Yeah,
Okay.
but we don't say, here's what all the responses are. Everything is blinded, like, participant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And have that key, but you're not going to know participant 3 is Meade County or anything. But participant 3 reported $80,000 for this accountant position, and then when we keep hitting that, and then when we did the actual analysis, we removed that data point from the analysis because it was just way off from everything else.
Madam Chair. Mark, looks to me like you were targeting the 5-state area for your study.
We did, when we put this together, we did talk with HR and leadership around who is an appropriate comparison point.
And if these other municipalities would have supplied the information, you'd have more market data. With
Yep.
that market data, could the results of the study possibly vary one way or another?
Sure, it's possible. We have enough data points there that we, could really draw some good conclusions, but could it, if we had a ton of other people respond, is it possible the market data would be different? Yeah, it's possible, but I don't know.
I appraise real estate for a living, and when I value something, the more data that I get, the more comfortable I feel.
Oh, I
And
agree.
so I understand your pain here. It'd been nice if they would have responded.
It would have been, and sir, I agree completely. The more data, the more accurate. And this wasn't great, but it wasn't that bad. Other counties I've worked with, I've had worse response rates. Lehigh County, for example, in Pennsylvania, we had a response rate of like 15-20%. It took us 5 months to get data. You guys didn't have that bad a response. It's not great, but and again, more would have been better, but it's not horrible.
So, and then when you did those responses, they were on 40 positions, or how many positions were you responding for?
40 positions, Madam Chair, as well as the benefits questions. Now, when they went through it, Minnehaha County, for example, may not have made matches to 40 positions. They might have only matched to 5 or 10 or 15 or some ratio. Very few organizations will find matches for all their jobs, but we had enough data to draw conclusions for quite a few of the positions.
So when you got the 40 positions, that was based on everything that we do in Pennington County? Or how did you get 40 positions? I
Well,
mean,
that's a great question. Actually, that's kind of the next thing we're going to be talking about. You're one slide ahead of me.
sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. So when we chose those benchmark positions, we tried to get at least representative of 50% of the population. So we chose positions that might have a lot of representation. And we wanted to get jobs that are all levels of the organization. So some non-exempt positions, some professional, some managerial positions, ones that we could find in the marketplace. If you have a unique or hybrid position, if it's one that you say, we have to find market information on, okay, we can include it. But truthfully, hybrid positions, you're probably not finding other ones in other organizations. So we can include it, but you're probably not going to have information on it. But jobs like an HR generalist, mechanic, a financial analyst, you're going to find those positions in pretty much everywhere. So those are the kind of positions you try to include in there. But if there is a job that's really hard to recruit or there's high turnover, yeah, you can include those.
Thank you.
But in addition, we did get those other 12 positions that we did separately and said, all right, here's what the pure market data is just for those positions.
So you have 40 plus the 12 that.
52, yes, ma'am.
52. Yes, sir. Thank you.
And when we look at these positions, we want to make sure it's at least an 80% match. We don't send just the job title. So a highway maintenance mechanic, we're not just going to put that title in there. We're going to use a description and ask HR, which is who usually fills these out, match it off of the job description, the short summary that we include there, not just off the title. So a police lieutenant, for example, might be a lot different in one place than another, but we have the description here at Pennington County. Here's what should be matched against. And we'll hope that they go through that. So here's all the positions we included. As you can see, there's some we've got some director level positions. We've got some manager level positions. We've got some supervisory positions, and some, professional level non-exempt.
Any question?
Nope.
Okay.
All right. So published surveys, kind of talked about that a little bit already. Just so you know, the surveys that we use, pretty straightforward. So we use Mercer, we use Willis Towers Watson, we use comp data. Gallagher Integrated, we use specifically for some of our medical type positions, because part of Gallagher does a lot of medical type surveys. So we pulled in some of that from there. And as I said, everything was aged January 20th. January 2020, excuse me.
So again, all the data is collected from the people that you had on the list plus other sources.
Yes, ma'am.
I guess that's where I was going with, that you just didn't use these people, you used other data.
We did use other data points, yes, ma'am. So again, has to be at least 80%. As I mentioned to Commissioner LaCroix, we did go through and take a look at, if there's a real variance from this, we may not use that data match. We may not use that survey cut. We'll take a look at, maybe we should use another data cut for this, if there's a huge variance from that.
Did you get good responses back on certain positions, more detailed descriptions and on some positions than others? I was looking at those. And
We did have some positions that had more responses than others. I don't know if we showed that within this, but if necessary, I can show you later. Here's the number of positions that we had responses for each one of those 40.
just by looking at them, I thought, like correctional officer, that'd be pretty typical that we'd all share that. And you might get a good response on that. And others might say, I want to take time to look it up, but.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. I don't recall off the top of my head who responded for which ones.
So Mark, why wouldn't they respond? Because they don't want you to know their data, or, I mean, that's kind of strange that you wouldn't just, I mean,
Madam Chair,
unless somebody just doesn't want to know your market.
it's hard to say. Sometimes it's laziness. Sometimes it's just, I just don't feel like looking at that. It should be pretty straightforward, but as to why some places don't respond on some jobs that you think would be really easy to match, whether it's a corrections officer or an admin assistant, it's impossible to say. Some people just want to get through it as quickly as possible, and I know this, and I'm just going to get this out here. Maybe it's only 10 matches, and I get it off my desk.
Well, I think a lot of it is time related, and I think John can probably respond to that as to how many requests he actually receives to complete also, which is, it does take time. It takes away from what your actual responsibilities that you feel that you have in your job, so.
It does, sir. But Commissioner Drews, what I want to also say is everyone who responds to the survey gets a copy of the survey results.
Right.
So there is a benefit to that. Like, oh, all these police people responded. Okay, they're going to know what the market is, the market data we gathered for these positions. So that helps them.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, because I was wondering what would be the incentive to take that much time to.
Right.
Commissioner LaCroix, it helps. I mean, if you haven't done this for a while and you see this, oh, here's what the market is for these jobs. Okay.
Well, you said, hold on just a sec, John. Sorry. So you said, before my train of thought goes, you said that some of these people were on that list were your customers. So they won't let you use their data? You have
No.
to ask them and they'll say no, or you just said they didn't respond?
I don't remember if we followed up with Olmsted County. Olmsted County is one that I saw that definitely is one of our clients. We can't just, even though we have Olmsted data as county, Olmsted County's data, we can't just use that. I don't remember if we did follow up with them or not. I know we called them, but I don't remember if we actually went to some of our people and said, look, would you just let us use this?
Right.
So Commissioners, again, John with Pennington County HR. I get usually 4 or 5 requests a year. It takes several hours and in some cases days to collect the data. You're analyzing, again, the job summaries that they provide, comparing it to our job descriptions. Is it a match? And then you have to go into our payroll system and actually pull all the financial data. But it's not just what we're currently paying. You're providing the entry level, the top of scale. You're providing the average wages for people that are in those positions, as well as how much time they've got on average. So you have to age all the current employees. It's very time consuming to do that. But again, the benefit, as Mr. Goldberg mentioned, is we get a copy back then of the results, the summary report, and that's very useful from a comparison perspective, but it's very cumbersome and time consuming to do. I just received another one actually last week from Cass County. So another one of his customers, but also one of the friends that I have.
Was it one of ours?
It is one of yours.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's great to be involved in that, and that's where usually you expect other counties to provide data when you've helped them. Some of the ones that were on the list are people that we've helped in the past, so it's a little, you're a little disappointed that they wouldn't return the favor, so.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Mark? No? Thank you.
So let's get to the findings here. So if you see a positive number within these findings, it means that the county's paying above market. Negative means you're below. Some general categories that we look at is if a position is 4% above or 3% below, we call that highly competitive. And general compensation theory says that anything that's market competitive is plus or minus 10%. So you could be 9% below or 8% above. In both cases, we would call that a market competitive rate. And then if you get over 10%, well, then there may be some misalignment there. But even that could be perfectly fine. So if you find a position is 20% below market, but then you find out that person was just recently hired into that role and they're still gaining competence and knowledge of it, well, that makes perfect sense. Or conversely, someone who's been in the job for 25 years and they're paid 18% above, well, okay, that probably makes sense also because that person's adding a lot of additional value. So just looking at the discrete numbers of where the job is paid relative to the market doesn't end a conversation. It's really just kind of the start of things. So with that salary range information, something to keep in mind is that salary ranges can be really, really variable. You heard me mention I've worked with ranges and design ranges just in the last couple of years that are as little as 18% or as high as 120%. Generally, you're seeing them between 40 and 60%. But sometimes ranges, even if they're here's what's on paper that is, that's not all that what you're using. You might say, you know what, yeah, the range from this goes from $14 an hour up to $21 an hour, but we're really not, and that's what we'll put on your survey, but we're really not bringing people in $14 an hour. We're not bringing anyone in less than 16 or 17. It's what's called a shadow range, and that's not going to be captured within the data that we're looking at here. That's something that's a policy. It's not, here's what the actual data shows. So on the aggregate, that is not for every job. That is for all the jobs combined. The county is competitive. You're about 5.75% below market. So that would be considered competitive. Now within that, you'll see jobs that are above market, some that are below market, but on the aggregate, you would be competitive.
The aggregate, what's aggregate?
All jobs together. So some jobs are going to be really high, some jobs are going to be really low. But again, when looking at that, there could be very good circumstances and reasons why a job is paid well above market or well below market. Okay, so now we're getting into some of the details behind this. So the 50th percentile of the market, that's a market competitive rate. What that says is if we've got 11 data points for an accountant position and we determine, yep, all 11 are appropriate, rank them 1 to 11. That data point that's at point number 6, that's the median of the market. That's the 50th percentile because half the data points would be lower, half the data points would be higher. So it's looking within that data set. When we get all those 11 points, kind of half of them are above, half of them are below. And that's what we determine as the 50th percentile of the market. So you could have, it's not just as easy as saying, well, we want to take the 40th percentile of the market and we said it's $50,000 is the median of the market, the 50th percentile. Well, if we want to take the 10%, well, then the 40th percentile would be 45,000. That's not the case because you're going to have to look at each one of those different data points that's listed there, 1 to 11, and that may not be 45,000. It could be 48,000. It could be 43,000. It could be 39,000. I mean, it depends on where those data points are and kind of, what that data set looks like.
So you're saying 50%, that 50% part, 50% of the market is getting paid that?
Well, what it's saying is half the data points are above, half the data points are below.
50%.
That's the 50th percentile.
So half of the people, or that particular job position is getting paid higher, and half of that particular job position is getting paid lower.
But
And that can depend on a lot of variables.
You could have, 43,000, 44,000, 45,000, 46,000, 47,000, and then 50,000, and then 55. I mean, it depends on how that data comes out. So it's not necessarily linear. It's not saying, well, we'll just take 10% less than that. It doesn't work like that.
And those variances are still out there, time of service stuff.
Yeah,
That's why
absolutely.
okay.
So when we're doing the 50th percentile, that's what we're getting at with this. So here's the comparison. There's a lot of data here. And I'm going to show you in just a few seconds kind of where things are with this and then how we use this to create that salary structure. But just because a job is, I'm going to go down to the highway maintenance worker because we were talking about that this morning. You see that highway maintenance worker 10.2% below market, number 33 there. Wow, that could be a problem. Maybe, maybe not. But when we're setting the salary ranges, what we're doing is, you know what? I'm going to actually back out of this and go into another one. So, looking at this, I'm going to forgive me, I'm going into another presentation here. What we do is all those jobs where we assign them grades. We went through all the grades that we talked about. We assign everything to a grade. And then what we do is say, all right, here's where all the grades are assigned. Here's what the market is for all that. If we're using the 50th percentile, and again, 80% of the time we're using the 50th percentile, this is how we set the salary range structures. So we say, here's all the grades, here's what all the market says. So what we do first is say, you know, where are you paying currently? Here's what the average salary is for all this. Along the bottom there is where all the DBM grades are. And along the vertical axis is where all the market is for all that stuff. And then we say, oh, you know, here's what the median salaries are for those jobs. So this is where you're currently paying. And then say, oh, here's what all the market is for these jobs. And then what we do is run what's called a line of best fit through all this. So we say, when we use this, what's called regression analysis, here's what all that data looks like. So just because that one position that's 10.2% below market, that would be one of these data points here. That might be in orange, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have that salary structure set at that, because we have these other jobs that are also in the same salary range. Oh, well, we have this other job that's an A13, and that might be 2% above. What, you know, and that's where all, you see these jobs here. Oh, all those are right here. But what happens is we run that line through this. It becomes basic math at that point. So here's what everything looks like. What this means here, this is how we actually set the midpoints behind the scenes. So this number here, this is what's called the slope of the line. So that's how we can figure out, okay, here's what the market is for this job. That's where the market midpoints come in. Because we'll say, all right, y equals whatever times x. And x in this case is the DBM grade.
Bottom line, your orange is your 50 percentile.
Yes, ma'am. And it becomes predictive. So this r squared equals 0.8788. What that means, it's 87.88% predictive. I think yours was 85 or something like that. But what it says is, here's the math behind the scenes. I don't usually get into this level of detail with the commissioner, but I know that there was a lot of concern around how the salary ranges were set and, you know, was there logic behind this? And I want to be as transparent as possible. So this is where we come in with this, and this is how everything is set.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner.
So Mark, you were telling us earlier that you got rid of the outliers.
Yeah.
So if you would have kept outliers, that could have really been skewed, and that might have been less than 0.88.
Yeah. That's why we usually take out the outliers. But I will tell you, Commissioner, if there is an outlier where you're like, you know what, this is an important job we need to keep in there, we'll do it. Truthfully, one data point's not going to affect things too much. It might skew the line just a little bit, but it's not going to have a huge effect when you have so many other data points. But if it is important to keep that in there, we can do that. But again, generally the rule is if it's over 2 standard deviations away, it's going out. I know that's a lot of math, and I apologize. But I want you to be comfortable. Again, not that you're going to be experts behind this, but that you understand here's the methodology that's being applied. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
You're a math guy. I know you got this. Madam Chair, is this all making sense?
Yep. Just so I knew the 50 percentile, your math, no, but just how you got there is good.
Okay. So that's with the regression analysis. That's just kind of a side note within the regression analysis on how we put together the structure. So it's not just a position was 10% below or 8% above. It got factored in with all those other jobs that were there, as well as the regression line through everything. Now, there's a number of different models we put in here, whether it's 7 steps to midpoint or 9 steps to midpoint, and how wide or how narrow those ranges are.
27.
Right here.
So with a fixed range, again, it will be a little bit skinnier than the non-fixed. It will have a lower maximum. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. And that range spread, again, is how far is it from that minimum to the maximum. Now, something I didn't really talk about. Y'all good?
You're good.
Okay.
We're just making sure we're on the same page,
So
literally.
you see here with the range spread, it goes from 40, 50, 55. General compensation theory says the range spread should be like that. So it's almost like an inverted pyramid. It's a little bit narrower at the bottom and a little bit wider towards the top. The reason is because of the types of jobs that are there. So, there could be some differences in jobs that are at a B22, but it's not going to be a huge difference in the labor market. But for example, at a D62, you might have a director of HR and a director of IT in the same salary range. And forgive me, John, the labor market for a director of IT is higher than a director of HR. You want to make sure that the salary range is wide enough to accommodate that. So that's why, you say, oh, okay, a little bit narrower towards the bottom and kind of gets a little bit wider the further up in an organization you go. Logically makes sense, right? So this is an example of a fixed range structure. And then whether it's 7 steps or 9 steps to that midpoint, that's what we need to discuss and make some decisions around. But that midpoint is aligned with the 50th percent of the market using that regression formula that we talked about.
So do you set the 7 or 9 based on budget or what, basically?
How quickly do you want people to get to the midpoint?
Okay.
So if you hire someone in at the range minimum, and again, you don't always have to do that, but there may be some cases where it's appropriate. You hire someone at the range minimum, how quickly are they going to get to that midpoint? And where they're hired in, as you see there, depends on kind of their user experience. There's a number of different factors within that. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. 7 steps midpoint, 7 steps fixed, you're looking at 40, 50, and 55 for the ranges. And that is in line with general best practice within the market. Again, generally between 40 and 60% is the most common.
So which one is that, did you say?
7 steps fixed, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And there's some good pros behind this. You've got some real fixed costs. There's really good salary progression, but it's harder to recruit people, especially younger employees, for something like that. And you can't differentiate based on performance. Most of my clients do use this, a step-based structure, but many are trying to incorporate some performance component within it because, well, 2 reasons. One, people are trying to at least figure out how can we pay for performance, and also because younger employees really want to move more quickly than sometimes structures allow. So this is the whole structure. I don't think we need to necessarily go through everything here, but it's 24 steps up to the maximum. And you can see everything kind of builds off of each other.
And what were our steps before 34?
And again, I do want to emphasize when people look at this, well, wait, B25, a B31 is less than a B25. Yep, but a B25 and a B32, you see, are the same salary range. A B24 and a B31, it's the same salary range because internally they're viewed as the same. You're either managing someone or higher complexity in your work. A C45 and a C52, same salary range.
So our steps in the Condry were how much per step, John?
1.25, ma'am.
Okay, and this one is how much per step?
They vary.
Okay, just depending on,
Job description.
okay.
Oh, no, please, sir.
I actually printed out some forms and I have them over in the conference room.
Okay.
But the steps will vary percentage-wise because you've got different bandwidths. And then also depending on if they're below midpoint or above the midpoint, percentages move more aggressively. They'll get a higher raise until they get to midpoint, and then it slows down slightly on the upper end.
So they start at, and what do they go to? Do you know that?
I don't have that,
Okay,
ma'am.
sorry.
And it depends on which structure. The 7-step or the 9-step, the percentages vary slightly because you've got fewer or greater number of steps between entry and midpoint.
Okay.
But I do have the forms next door. Sorry. I can get some actually and bring them
Nope.
back.
You're okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. So, you know, here's where things look like. So there's a difference, dollar increase per step. You can kind of see what that looks like, either for the up to the midpoint or from the midpoint to the range maximum. You can see it does slow down a little bit within this particular model. And then 9 steps, same kind of thing. Again, 24-step structure. Same range width, 40, 50, 55. Same pros and cons. It's just how quickly are you getting to that midpoint. So more aggressively within the 7-step, less aggressively takes longer in the 9-step. But the maxes aren't changing. Minimums aren't. It's everything's changing. The minimum, the midpoint, and the maximum aren't changing. It's just how quickly we get there. And you can see the dollar amounts are a little bit different. Went and got it.
I did. So Commissioners, John again with HR. I've got a copy. They're eye charts. Let me warn you in advance. So it's on legal size paper, but because you'll see what I mean. So y'all want one of that? Just one copy.
You'll need your triple bifocal.
And Mark, while he's handing that out.
Yes, sir.
As a commissioner, I've been told by a number of departments that we as a county have been pretty generous the last couple of years. But that's not always been the case. And so, as a commissioner, what I'm looking for is something that's sustainable, that employees can basically be fairly well assured that there's going to be adjustments. And we aren't going to go through those periods of time of where, but revenue is just not there to grant salary adjustments. And so, as I look at your information, I lean towards the 9-step fixed.
Okay.
As a more sustainable program probably for us. So that's just where I'm coming from.
Okay, Commissioner. Commissioner Drews, what I would
Base
caution you with is
to
both
number
models
2,
work fine.
1.96%.
But if you do go with a 9 years to the midpoint, that
base
could potentially make it harder to hire someone in at the minimum. It may be harder to retain them until they
from
get to that
2
midpoint.
to 3.
9 years is a long time. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying when doing that, think about that as a long-term strategy also.
Slows down a little bit.
Thank you.
Further you progress along.
My other question, a follow-up on
Yes.
Mr. Drews, is when you say you reevaluate most of them are 3 to 5, so I'm kind of going back.
Yes.
Are you looking at the base, market value, of redoing the salaries and wages? What do you mean by that 3 to 5%? Because we're so used to working with the CPI. I mean, if we're not using that, we're using the steps. I greatly understand the consistency in that, but so you're saying like every 5 years we'd have to do another market salary adjustment, or 3 to 5 years?
What I would say, Commissioner, is every 3 to 5 years, you talk with someone, whether it's us, whether it's Country, say, you know what, here's jobs that we want to get market information on. It would be a lot less than what we're doing for this whole thing. Or use your market, use the published salary surveys and say, you know what, here's, just pull published salary information for these jobs and just do it, basically a wellness check. Think of it like your car. You bring it in for a checkup every year or so, or every couple months, just to make sure everything's aligned. And to make sure that those positions, you're not falling behind the market, really, in a bunch of them.
Okay, that was my question, because it seems like we've had a lot of discussion on as just Mr. Drew said, some years you say, we're not doing this, and then we fall underneath the market, and we want to make sure we're fair.
Yep. And Commissioner, like I said, if it's as simple as, 3 years, 5 years from now, you call us up and say, can you just pull published salary information for these 15, 20, 30 jobs? That's not that big a deal, and that's not a huge cost.
So you have a 9-step and a 7-step, and you said most people do the 7-step fixed?
I will tell you, Madam Chair, that Most times, the years to the midpoint, to the 50th percentile,
Right.
is between 5 to 7 years. I have done them as many as 9 and 10 years. That is less common, but I have done that. But most times it's 5 to 7 years is the most common range that I see that.
Because based on percentile, where you start at 1.9, or basically 2 to 2.5 is for range 1, and then that's the 9-step. The other one, comparable, is you start at 2.61 on what's called the,
Madam Chair, you have to do what's appropriate for the county. If 9 years is appropriate, then that is a model that could work and is not far off the market. But is it less common? Yeah, it is a little less common, but it's not unheard of by any means.
okay. I'm just looking at the comparables on it, so.
So Mark, based on your experience, in talking about bringing on new employees,
Yes, sir.
what percentage would be even brought in at that minimum?
Honestly, not that much. I couldn't give you an exact percentage,
Right.
but I'm seeing less and less people bringing people in right at the minimum because it's hard to do so. Normally, if you're bringing someone in, they have some experience. Often, Commissioner, when I see people that are at the minimum, they're employees that have been promoted internally, either one step or kind of one level or two levels, and they're brought in probably right at the minimum. But bringing someone in outside, it's fairly uncommon to do that. It's not, it certainly can happen, but it's less common. Usually you're bringing someone in somewhere within that first quartile or even second quartile within the salary range.
But again, they can bring them in between that 1 and 7 or 1 and 9, depending on what we decide.
Yes, ma'am. That is your decision.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Yes, sir.
As we progress here, what I'm getting out of it is what we're trying to do is figure out what the value of every person that's employed by the county, what their value is to the county.
I wouldn't, Commissioner, I'm not sure I'd put it in that way. You want to evaluate the jobs and see kind of where the jobs are. Within the,
Let's put it that way, that position.
we want to evaluate each position and put together a hierarchy that makes sense.
And then pay accordingly,
Yes, sir.
based on a 9 or a 7 fixed rate. Yes.
Okay.
We got that?
Yes, ma'am.
Lloyd, you have any questions?
No, the only question I would have is I like that range of being able, I know that low end part's low, but if I'm interviewing an employee and I think he's good enough to be 7 up and I can show that appreciation by letting him know that, I like that. I see it as a way to
Yeah.
show appreciation for someone's job experience.
And it stays, both these, the fixed and the, whether it's 9 or 7, still are in ranges that are sustainable for the county. That's what we're looking at for moving forward. Because at 5% the last couple of years, it's not sustainable for our county to keep doing that and be able to do our budget. So,
Totally makes sense.
just so,
Madam Chair, Commissioner LaCroix, I do want to mention one thing though. When bringing people in higher, always be conscious of compression within a particular area. So yes, if you need to bring someone in at $18 an hour because you're not getting them less than that, that's what you got to do. But if everyone else if you're in your department is being paid $16, $17 an hour, you need to think about that then. Okay, what is this going to do to everyone else in my department? So ultimately, you need to do what you need to do. And maybe that person that you're bringing in at 18 has humongous experience and has a unique skill set that people in your department don't have, which would then make sense to bring someone in. But always remember, you need to keep in mind the other people that are there currently, and you're not going to be able to sometimes to do what you need to do because of internal equity.
I would have faith in our department heads to know where they are.
hopefully, yep.
So with this structure, it's a little bit different. Again, in both cases, it's 7 steps and 9 steps. However, the difference is from the midpoint up to the maximum, it is based on performance. So what it says is, okay, if you're in your job for 7 years or 9 years, if you're brought in at the minimum, After that, from the midpoint beyond that up to the range maximum, how quickly you progress is based on your own performance. Salary ranges are the same, so 40, 50, 55. But what it says is there's a pay for performance here. And if you're going to be doing a great job, well, then you're going to get a bigger increase. Now, this is a really good system if you have a strong performance management system. And I know that the county is looking to implement something along those lines. Once that's in place, I think this could be very effective. But there isn't, some challenges communicating this to employees. The employees have to have confidence in the system. And truthfully, you have to be careful that there's no bias, that you don't open yourself up to any potential lawsuits. While only the men are getting increases and the women aren't getting, the exceptional increases. You need to be really conscious of that. But it can be a very effective tool. I actually just put it in place at a college in Minnesota, as well as a tribal council in Michigan, a structure like this.
So John, you said something about that it would take a couple of years or something to get there. What did you mean by when we do the performance-based past those minimums?
Madam Chair, what we basically have to have is a performance management system, an evaluation system, if you will, countywide, that allows us to have some consistency, visibility, accuracy, and a process that's in place that all the employees trust and understand. We're in the process of actually introducing that at this point. So you approved with my budget for this year, actually, the Perform module of NeoGov. That is a system that would allow us to get to this. It will take us, first of all, it'll take us approximately 2 years to be fully on whatever system we implement from Gallagher, whether it's the fixed 7, 9, or the matrix. The second piece is to have that performance management system in place again, so we have faith that it's being executed properly, that there's consistency, and again, that we can evaluate those things to make sure everybody is getting fair and consistent treatment in the system. It will take us a couple of years to get that running as well. So when I say it's going to take a couple of years to get anything in place that might support this, it's because of the structure itself, as well as the process of getting the new performance management system up and running.
So if someone is past that salary or 7 or 9, and they're going past that, or they're already past that, are you using, where are you going from there if you don't have the system where it needs to be?
So they would still be on the step processes, ma'am, under the 7 or 9 step fixed.
Right.
You wouldn't see a change. Under this program, wherever they currently were at with regard to pay,
Right.
you could still implement it. Doesn't matter if they're past the midpoint.
Okay.
You can still implement the system because it ends up being based on their performance as well as where they currently are in the pay scale, so the band penetration, if you will. And I think Mr. Goldberg actually has a slide that'll talk about that a little bit.
Right there.
So there's a 7, there's a 9, and then there's a
A matrix.
matrix.
Yes, ma'am. And the matrix could be a 7 or a 9 as well.
Okay.
We have the 9 step as the example here, but we could do either with this as well. The changes, when you get into the percentages, you'll see that there's NA for Q1 and Q2, because actually that's all steps up till midpoint. And that's what those percentages are, is how much of the pay band are they exposed to or experiencing right now. If you start this at the midpoint and move up to top of band, that means they've already exceeded Q1 and Q2 with regard to pay levels. You only would actually have the Q3 or the third quartile and Q4 or the fourth quartile to actually use for the system. And then depending on the person's performance through, again, this system, they'd either be an exceeds expectations, a meeting, or meeting minimal. I mean, those types of things are not meeting at all. And then that determines what percentage of an increase they would get that year for that increase.
So
Pardon me?
John, tell me how many people, if we have a lot of 30-year employees, what are we doing? Is this making any difference for the people that have been there? I mean, is that what you're using for performance so they can make more money, or how are we
No.
changing or maybe not changing that? I mean,
So if I'm understanding, Madam Chair, if I'm off track, please correct me. But with the system and with our current system, we have people that have already gone past the top of scale.
right.
With this system, there will be as well. There's probably 35 to 40 employees out of 800 that will be either at the top of scale with the next step increase or will currently be at top of scale. The proposal to actually offset that it was in the slides that I presented a week ago. But part of that then would allow that time of service bonus to be paid to them every year, because they would be what's called red circled. Their rate of pay would be frozen. If they're at the top of the scale, that's where the scale stops. And their pay would be frozen at that pay level until the pay band would adjust in that 3 to 5 year time span as you make an adjustment. If the pay band adjusted up past where they currently are, then they would see the increase from those steps that would become available for them. If they're still above, and we have some people that aren't even on the scale right now in the county, so it's going to take longer for them to catch up, if you will, with the structure. But there's a process for us to make sure that they see a bonus of some type.
So
If
how-
they don't get a step increase, they would still see the bonus.
So how are you gonna determine time of service? I mean, do you do a percentage by time of service, or how many years they've been there? I mean,
It's kind of a combination of both, Madam Chair. So right now, the time of service is being done annually, anytime they've got to 10 years plus. The proposal to make it work with this system to actually also bring that into a sustainable program is that it would be done on milestone anniversaries only. So it'd be 10, 15, 20. And as long as they've had at least 10 years with the county, if they're at the top of the pay scale for their pay band, they've got the option of either promoting up into a different job, or if that's not an option for them, they really want to stay with what they're doing, then the proposal is that they'd still receive that time of service annually for anybody that had 10 years or more.
and hopefully it'd be a percentage that, you know, most of your top people, meaning in their service, would get, kind of like we did the 2% COLA or something. That would be, the main thing is that our long-term are just as well taken care of as our,
Yes, ma'am. There's got to be some piece of this that actually allows for them to be still compensated and to show them that the county, again, respects and appreciates their contribution.
thank you.
So John, going back to the matrix, if we adopted the matrix at some point in time, that does put a little bit more onus on the department heads as far as, so that, I mean, we really need a buy-in from department heads before we could move to that. So that's got to be part of the discussion over the course of the next months, couple of years or so, as to how well that's going to be accepted by departments. Because you can't do it for one department and not do it for another one. I think it's got to be one or all, basically.
Yes, sir, that would be the ideal process, would be have all departments on that same program. But again, getting there is going to take a little bit of time. We have some departments that have been really good about doing evaluations annually and some more frequently. We have other departments that haven't done a performance evaluation ever. So we're working to standardize that process as well.
So before they got their step or their performance, whatever step, they would have to go through evaluation and then submit it.
Yes,
Not-
ma'am.
Not just the department head say, okay, I just gave you a raise.
Correct. They'd have to actually have the evaluation in the performance evaluation system, so it's visible, we can track, look at it, we just do spot checks. We're not gonna try to manage performance evaluations for each department, trust me, there's not enough time in the day to make that possible. We would do spot checks to make sure, are they using any words that shouldn't be used? Some things, again, indicate that there may be a bias or discrimination in place. We make sure those things aren't being done, and we also make sure that it's being fair and consistent in how they're applying. It's very obvious in that management system, the reporting that gives us visibility. Do we have a certain department that rates everybody as an exceeds? Do we have other departments that rate everybody as not meeting? Those are very visible in this performance management system. You can see, and if you got any outliers, then you look a little closer to help them work through the process.
Well, they can still do that, can't they? Because the department heads are at that discretion. Meaning, unless you come back or somebody sees, okay, everybody's got their performance based in this department.
We look for those, again, as he did with the data they collected, you look for the outliers, what doesn't seem to fit. For example, I had a discussion with a department a week ago. They have a person that's in a protected class that hasn't been promoted, where everybody else in that department has. What caused that person not to be? So those are the things, as an attorney, you're gonna say, discrimination. Honestly, those are the things that we need to help protect against to make sure there's consistency and fairness and actually real visibility to what this needs to be. So you set standards, you set clarity, you set expectations, and you just spot check to make sure that those things are being followed.
Those parameters are gonna be very specific though, and that's what's gonna protect us from having this. If they don't meet this specific parameter of performance, then they're not gonna get their performance increase. So it's gonna basically take, not opinion, but, well, opinion. It's gonna take opinion and do I like this person more than maybe I like this other person? It's gonna take that out of the mix because you're gonna have very specific parameters that they have to meet in order to get that.
Yes, sir. So that's part of the challenge of getting this drafted and established. We have to determine what all of those are.
Right.
There are some things called universal competencies where communication or how hard they work. I mean, team building. I mean, those kind of things are universal no matter what position they're in. There's others that are more specific to those individual positions, and we have to identify and then document what those different levels of performance are for each one of those. So that's what we're working on right now. We've had 2 calls now with a vendor. And Sandy's been working to get those things established. We're doing some trials with departments. The goal, though, is hopefully this summer we'll have that rolled out and be able to document all of that for every department. It's a lengthy process. It's not easy to establish. I will tell you that we've got a couple departments right now on the admin side that have really good systems in place. Those will be easy to replicate in the performance system. For most of the other departments, we're going to be drafting and building those things from scratch. Anything else for me, commissioners?
I think, I would imagine that those performance evaluations are gonna be easier on the A level than they are gonna be on the D level because of the complexities of those positions.
I think that's a fair statement, sir. Thank you.
John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. So again, we looked at a number of different implementation options. Option 1, that's a mid-year implementation. That's July 2020. Commissioner DeSanto, I know you have interest in kind of the financial aspects behind this. So when looking at that, 0.31% of payroll just to get employees into the minimum, that is pretty good. I think that makes that, when I'm putting together implementation options, if I see something that's 0.5% or less to get people into the salary ranges, that makes me confident that, okay, this structure that we're talking about is one that can work. But again, it's 0.31, so 120,000 approximately just to get everyone in there, and that affects about 42 employees. And then option 2, well, there's a couple different pieces with that. And that puts everyone onto the closest next step based on their current salary. So in this case, let's say we've got Joe, and Joe is making $42,000. So he's in the, and his salary range minimum is $40,000. So he's in the salary range, but the next step up for him might be $42,100, just based on his current, where we evaluated the job and where he is currently. Okay, well, just to put him on the salary on that next step would only be a $100 increase. Okay, that just puts him on step. But if it's 43,000 or 45,000, it's just based on straight math in terms of where the person is currently and how to get them on step. No one would be reduced, but it would be just a cost, just straight up cost. Here's what the next one up is. And that one, that's actually a pretty good number also. To have it be less than 1% is pretty solid. So you can see there's a difference there, whether it's 7 steps or 9 steps, and that's just based on how many steps there are up to, to get people up to that, up to the midpoint. Oh, and the difference with the matrix, you can see that's even less. What that says is people that are above that midpoint, they wouldn't receive another step. It's just you're paid where you are currently. And here's the cost breakdown for a couple. I apologize. There's a lot of costing options behind this. We have a number of different ways we can propose on this. So this just shows a number of different ways on it. As you can see, 42 people below minimum, 40 above maximum in one case, 30 in others. And that's just based on the, that range maximum. But there's a lot of data there. So you can see the costs vary anywhere from 120,000 up to 290,000. But all of it below 1% of payroll. And then if you wanted to wait until the implementation in January 2020, quite a bit less.
2021.
I'm sorry, sir?
2021, you
Oh,
mean.
I'm sorry, I said 2020. I meant to say 2020. It's weird to think it's going to be 2021 next year. But yes, costs are a lot less.
Just speaking as one commissioner, you know, in looking at the information, talking to John, you know, it appears to me that we can't go back to January 2020 to implement this. And I think it would be very difficult to do it for July of 2020. So as one commissioner speaking, I think I'm looking towards that
The 2021?
2021.
Okay.
So,
And that would give you time to communicate, make sure everyone was comfortable with it, and get everything aligned perfectly before you implement. So,
right.
Well, I still think we need a lot of discussion on this also, so that
Well, I
also
agree.
gives us, that's the bottom line, so people understand. I don't think at this point we're all getting it fully. And then some of that performance-based and some of those other things that we need to discuss where we want to go, so I agree.
Madam Chair, this is the component with the benefits piece. As you can see on the main level, it's, you know, you're leading the market, you're doing a really nice job with it. I know that we probably have gone, yep, we're at 10:30 right now. Would you want me to go through this, or should we save the last half hour for questions from the audience or from the commissioners?
Let's go ahead and take 5, and then, if that's okay, we'll just keep going
Yeah.
through it, and then we'll have questions after. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So want to talk a little bit about the benefits. We had talked about high level before around it, but so of the people we surveyed, we got 13 responses. When you can see there is the operating budget, the number of population, so actually fairly comparable to Pennington County. But on the aggregate, the county is actually really doing well, leading the market in terms of benefits and pay practices. And that aligns with what you had told me for your pay philosophy. So COLA adjustments, they're similar to what other organizations have done, so you guys are very much in line with that. This actually surprised me that 8 of the 11 organizations that responded on this use a pay philosophy. I think it's great, but it's a little surprising.
Why?
That it's not as common as you would think. Most of our organizations don't have pay philosophies in place. They just pay whatever. So often, you have the control point at the midpoint. Some do have it a max, some do have it a min, but there's variation within that. You can see there's a couple of the organizations that responded that actually do use our decision band method. Others use classification or market pricing or no system at all. But a huge variation in terms of how do you evaluate jobs? And then do you use merit pay? A couple places do. So you see three places that do use either merit pay or pay for performance. And is there an incentive bonus plan? Generally speaking, not. And to have bonuses or incentive plans in place for public sector organizations is pretty uncommon. I myself only know of 1 or 2 organizations that use it. Lots of them talk about it, but it's really hard to implement. And then it's a question of, do you use steps? Do you use open ranges? How do people do this? And as you can see, steps are pretty common. In some cases, you'll have multiple responses. So places might have a step and an open range. They might have multiple salary structures. That's why you see the numbers don't add up to 13, because some places do have some combinations. And some places will have multiple structures. As you can see, they're pretty common to have 1, but some places will have 2 or even 3. And then some specific questions around, how do people move through? Is it based on individual performance? Is it based on longevity, basically step system? Kind of what does that look like? But you can see most of the time it is based on longevity. So it's step. It's, you're here for 5 years, you move 1 step, every year you move from step 5 to step 6 kind of thing. And most times it is as a percent of base increase. Some places will do it as a set dollar amount, but as a percent is pretty common. But you can see there's variance. You can be really creative on this, within this stuff. And some questions around, hey, do you offer promotions, demotions? What do you do with some of this? And then who has the final determination? Who makes the final call on that? You can see HR is pretty common, but city management is most common. Bless you. So you can see there the average pay increase, 3%, but the salary structure moves less than that. And again, thinking is you want to have people progress through the salary ranges. So you want to have that pay increase be greater than what you adjust for the structure. And often it's the structure, the salary adjustments are on a base fixed percent. It's interesting with this. A lot of times you do see this pay minimum, but it's almost the exact same amount, pay minimum versus negotiated experience. Something we were talking about kind of offline earlier. Where do you bring people in? It's, I do not recommend bringing it at the job range minimum unless it's someone who really doesn't have a lot of skills in that job, but it is fairly common. But you're seeing here more and more, 6 for this, 3 for this. It's like, okay, it's.
You find the midpoint, don't you?
I'm sorry?
I said, so then you find the midpoint, right?
You find the midpoint, but in some cases it's, we had talked earlier, can you bring people in above the range minimum? Yeah, you can. But in some cases, you can bring people up all the way to the range maximum if necessary. So if you combine those two together, hey, actually all 4 of them, all 3 of these together, it's much more common to have some negotiation rather than the pay minimum. And again, the reason why there's 11 participants, but that adds up to more than 11 is because of multiple salary structures. And who makes the final call on it? Well, as you can see there, it varies. And with this, how do you do the internal transfers? It's, honestly, it's where you're currently paid is most common right there. So you're being paid $50,000, you have a transfer or promotion, where your current pay is often is a huge determining factor on where you're paid in the next salary range. But there are differences within that. And then, when you're hired into the range, where's it come? Again, sometimes it's minimum. Most of the time, it's not. There's some negotiation that takes place, and that is most common. And then this is just a question of, hey, where are you guys paying according to the market? Average vacation time. You can see there you're a little bit low for the first couple of years, and then you're pretty common for other parts of it, and then above 10, from 10 to 15, you're a little bit below, but generally speaking, you're pretty much there. But for part-time, you're really good. Part-time, you're actually well above market. And sick days, you're a little bit low, but see the difference is sick days and personal days get combined together, and you guys are right on track with the market. No difference in paid holidays. Health benefits, just a couple of things. A lot of them do include their pharmacy benefits within the medical premium. But within this, here's where things are. So you're leading the market because you're covering medical, dental, and pharmacy under the same plan. But you guys are doing really, really well for both employee, basically kind of across the line. You guys are doing really, really well. But this is what the market is telling us from these respondents. And there's the details there, whether it's PPO or POS and kind of what things are. You can see there's no HMOs. Nobody's doing that. But generally we see PPOs and high deductible plans. And then here's with the dental plan. Most places do use a PPO. I don't see generally any HMO dental plans. Vision, that's minimal cost, honestly. But yeah, most places do provide it. Life insurance. Some places do offer long-term care, some short-term disability. It's interesting with the wellness piece that you see up there now. I'm getting a lot more questions from my clients asking about, what are places doing for wellness as a way to kind of help keep some of those benefit costs down. So here's what we're seeing within that. Who's offering some, expenses, some reimbursements, some premium discounts, and I'm seeing that more and more in a lot of places offering premium discounts. Health screenings, I actually just went through one myself for my organization. So just some things to think about, as a way to do some cost control on your benefits pieces.
What do you do when you do a health screening? I mean, do you go,
I will tell you what just happened for me. I had to have a health screening. If I didn't have that biometric screening, then a tobacco surcharge would have been automatically applied to me and some other charges, even though I don't smoke. But they had to go through and confirm that. So it wasn't just, well, we trust that you're not smoking. We're going to kind of do a blood draw and check out a bunch of this stuff. That's something that I'm seeing more and more of.
through all the employees going through the health screening?
It is voluntary. You don't have to do it, but if you don't do it, then a surcharge is applied.
Okay, thank you.
And then defined benefit, defined contribution. So limited information on that defined contribution, but just some general information around that.
Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mark's of this since this presentation?
Maybe just a quick overview
Yes, sir.
of the 7, 9, and matrix.
There you go.
Absolutely. Let me go back to that. Hold on.
I guess just the pros and cons.
Give us timeframes too. So the 7 and 9, 7 years, 7?
Yes, sir. 7. So it would be 7 years.
Okay.
So the idea is you would take 7 years to get to the midpoint, or 9 years to get to the midpoint.
Gotcha.
So that was what I was saying earlier to Commissioner LaCroix. If you have, or actually no, it was Commissioner Drews I was talking to. If you say, all right, we're going to do the nine step to midpoint implementation, and you're hired at the range minimum, it's going to take 9 years to get up to the midpoint to be market competitive. At the 50th percentile of the market. That's a long time. But if that's what you need to do, then that is in line. It's a little bit more than generally in the market, but it's not completely out of sorts.
But as you're saying, most people are not hired at minimum.
Correct.
It'd take them a lot less time to get to midpoint.
That is correct. But it still would take longer under the 9 steps than the 7 steps to get to there, depending on where you're hired.
So we'd have to figure out how many people, depending on the 7 or 9 year midpoint, to figure out when we had to implement performance, right?
I think he's
Or
got that figured
matrix.
out.
Well, that's for the matrix, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
So if you didn't want to use the matrix, then you could still use the other implementation option. And truthfully, even if you said, we're going to do the 7 steps to midpoint for right now, and we'll implement the matrix in 2 years or what have you, you could still do that because it doesn't change the ranges at all. I mean, the range is the same whether, if you use a 7 step to 7 steps or the matrix. The ranges are the same. It's simply a question of, where do you go after that midpoint? How quickly do you move through that?
I guess that's where I'm, because depending on how many people we have at midpoint, we're gonna need to go up to 24 steps. And if they're already at midpoint, then how do you, am I missing something? Then how do you implement after that?
What I would suggest is, let's say we've got Joe, you use the 7 steps to the midpoint and use that.
Like Joe's at the 7th step right now.
Yeah.
So
let's say-
every year we'd just do it by year after that as well. No
Right,
matter
so-
where he's at, he gets that 1 step or whatever every year.
until let's say you want to do that and you wanted to convert to the matrix in 2023, for example.
Okay,
If you implement January 1st, 2021, Joe's at the midpoint of his salary range.
okay,
January 2022, he'd move 1 step.
okay.
And then 2023, those steps go away. And then it becomes a question of how he progresses would be based on his own personal
Okay,
performance.
thank you, because I wasn't getting, okay,
That
you
makes
got,
sense?
yes, that makes more sense, that if we don't do the matrix, then we go through the 24 steps. If Joe's at step 7, you sure are a good example today, Joe. So you start at 7, and then if we don't implement it, he just goes one step every year. If we don't, then he goes, like in 23, goes performance-based and gets written depending on his performance, how far he goes up that range.
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay, and when you get to that performance base, does he go one step based on the performance, or wherever I think he should be
No,
on that
that's where it
performance?
comes to the, oh goodness,
Or
where
the
is that?
matrix, or however you're saying it.
That's where it goes on this, Madam Chair.
Okay,
So that's when it says, all right, you're in Q3. What's your performance rating? Are you an exceeds performer? Are you meets plus? That's what kind of increase you get. So,
hold on a sec, let me
Yes, ma'am.
look at that. What page is quarter? You guys have that?
page 79.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay.
We don't have 79. We don't have 79 down here, do we?
Yeah, but.
Oh, I think it might be
No
78.
page numbers. It's on-
I think page
the
numbers may
bottom.
be slightly off.
On the bottom, Mark. What?
If yours is printed
Yep,
like this,
Yes.
page 40.
okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry. I'm like, we don't have 79, son. Okay,
And
so,
Madam Chair, just to point out, so EE is exceptional performance. That's the highest rated performance
okay,
of the 5-step scale. MP is meets plus, so that would be step 4. ME is meets expectations. NM is meets minus, and NM is not meets. So on a 5-step scale, 3 is, you're kind of right there at you're meeting your performance level.
so not meets means he gets nothing based on performance. He hasn't changed. He's still the same.
Correct.
If you're at that bottom level at not meets, generally speaking, you're on your way out.
I was going to
And
say,
honestly, at meets minus, that's pretty bad too.
Okay.
Especially within public sector, when I see performance ratings distributions, that meets I usually see almost no one at the not meets, but meets minus usually is honestly less than 5% of an employee population, and usually 70+% are at the meets expectations, with about 30% at the exceptional and meets plus. It
so,
tends to skew a little bit to the right.
So
generally speaking.
Madam Chair.
excuse me, just 1 second, Ron, just one more question. So quartile, so basically you've got the meaning now, and then you're doing 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yep.
Tell me what that is.
So if we're looking at the 24-step structure,
Okay,
step 1, in this case, step 1 to 3, well, it depends on if we're looking at the 7-step or 9-step.
Okay.
Step 1 to 4 in the 9-step would be quartile 1. Step 4 to 9, 5 to 9 in the 9-step structure would be quartile 2. And then for quartile 3 would be 10 to 8, 17, 18. It's just kind of chunking it up in terms of, what in which quartile would you fall. So 10 to 17, 16, 17 would be quartile 3, and 17 to 24 would be quartile 4.
so why do you have 1 and 2 if there's nothing in there? Am I
Because
missing
it's out,
something?
you're stepping, ma'am. So that's when the
Oh.
steps to the midpoint.
So you wouldn't have a quarter 1 and 2 because it's between 1 and 7 or 1 and 9.
Correct.
Okay, and then from there, then it'd be, what
Then
you
it
just
becomes
said.
math, honestly. It's just kind of where do you fall within the overall range.
Do we set the quartile, or do you already have it between
It's
that
math.
7 and?
Yeah, that's where John has the calculation there.
Okay,
Say, all right, where would that fall?
okay. Everybody get that?
24 divided by 4, isn't it?
I'm sorry, sir?
24 divided by 4. Each quartile?
Well, it wouldn't be, because it's an unbalanced range. Because step 7 or step
Depends
9
on the
would be the
mid.
midpoint.
Yep,
Okay, gotcha.
okay.
Normally, you'd be correct. If we were to set the midpoint at step 12, yes, but it's not.
Ron, you had a question, sir?
So the difficulty here would be for the department head to figure out which one of these categories, the NM or the EE. So it's going to be kind of a subjective decision based on.
That goes towards,
department head.
yes, Commissioner, what that goes towards what John was saying before in terms of performance ratings and kind of how do you rate those people.
And for the system to work, they actually have to make that decision. If an employee's not performing, they have to make sure that that rating's correct.
Yes, Commissioner, that is correct.
So some people, it might not move people up as fast, and other departments might move it up faster. Just depends on their meeting, or if they're not, or if they decide, department head, if they think everybody should get a raise or everybody shouldn't, based on performance, so.
Well, the subjectivity of it also depends upon how specific the,
Descriptions are.
Yeah,
right, the descriptions are.
on those.
And whether or not they're
what we
meeting
think.
those descriptions, so.
So a little more work for the department heads, because they're gonna have to really keep track of their employees and find out if they're going above what the description is or not achieving what the description is.
Most of the time, they should know from working with them, I guess.
Commissioner, anytime a performance evaluation system is implemented, there has to be a lot of training involved.
Questions?
None for me.
Okay, we're ready for staff?
Yep.
All right. Who'd like to go first? Anybody have questions? Go ahead, Joe. You always have questions. We're picking on Joe today, but he had some for us yesterday. Did you already meet with Mark and get your questions answered, Joe? Okay,
I guess that's my question for you, Joe, when you come up, is your comfort level today as compared to yesterday?
Speaking from the highway department, Mark, Connie, and myself met with Mark this morning. And we had some serious concerns about where our maintenance workers were going to be placed on the scale. But after talking to him and speaking with you guys yesterday, and hearing you guys this morning, hiring isn't necessarily at the minimum, right? That's kind of up to the department head in the interview, and figuring out where to place them on the scale. I think we need to have, because the midpoint is where it's competitive pay, right? If you bring them in at minimum, they don't have any experience. We're training them, and we're getting them the skills to get to that midpoint, to obtain those skills. So having the ability to hire somebody in at that midpoint is very important to the highway department, and I'm sure it is to the rest of the county, to be competitive and be able to entice employees to come. And we actually, Connie and Mark and myself, sat down and redid some of our job descriptions, because right now we don't have any progression for our highway maintenance workers, which are the lifeblood of the highway department. They're out there clearing the roads, doing the work on the roads. So getting them to be able to have a progression from not only a maintenance worker, but we changed our job titles a little bit to apprentice highway worker, journeyman highway worker, and a lead highway worker, and then you have the foreman above them. So they have, for the employees that are currently with us, they have the ability to go to that next step to learn how to operate all the equipment and learn new skills to jump to that journeyman. And that way it makes it a lot easier for us as a department heads and I'm speaking for, I guess, highway, but it makes it a lot easier for us to hire in at that and say, hey, once you get these skills, we can bump you up to this. So that's our take on it, and I'll look through these and get my question. But
thank you.
Say,
Thanks,
Joe,
Joe.
what was the rating that you guys determined that would be?
for the maintenance workers,
Yeah.
Mark and I talked this morning, and I actually had him go through our new job description that we kind of, his initial thought is an A13, but it could go to a B21.
Okay.
So that's the talk that we need to have with John and your guy and the commission to figure out where we're going to place that, and then subsequently, that would be the apprentice maintenance or highway worker would be a B21, and then the journeyman would be a B22 or a B23, and then the lead would be a B31 because they're supervising people in the same band, correct?
If they're supervising people in the same band, it would be a B31, yes.
So that way you still have
Foreman would be B32.
correct. So there's ways to figure it out, and it opened my eyes this morning to how flexible it is, and you're not manipulating the numbers. You're making sure your structure works for your department.
Basically, your job description fits the band and the grade and the subgrade.
Correct.
Madam Chair, so what Joe and I did this morning was we literally walked through the apprentice and went through each one of the different duties, and I said, this duty's an A1, here's why. This duty's an A1, this one's borderline. And we went through a couple that were borderline. this could be an A1, this could be a B2 duty. And I hope that exercise was useful for you.
And it was very useful.
The sheriff I knew had some questions. Kevin Carley, did you have some questions still? Or Mark Bargo, I know we had a class. Janet, anybody have some questions? You guys all know how to do this now? You're all making, not pretty faces, so.
I feel better knowing that I don't have to start at the minimum of the band, but very few people that we hire have dispatch experience. But they still have to pass a test and demonstrate a certain level of skills to be eligible to get the job, and only about 20% of the people we test demonstrate those skills. So my question would be, would I be able to move them higher up through the steps based on the fact that they had to demonstrate certain skills to even be eligible for an interview?
That would be an organizational decision, but my own take was, yeah, you can probably move them up within the step based on the skills that they have.
Okay.
Well, and the classes and the things, those are building skills, then they're not just coming in, not
Right.
knowing anything.
Right, so what, in my vision, we probably have to do a little bit of work on our job descriptions as well. If I could bring them in at a higher step and then as they progress through call taker to dispatcher to EMD, then we could bring them up to through the pay scale.
Based on education.
Yes.
And that's, I think that's most jobs, hopefully in town, that's what they base it on as well. The more education you have at that job, the better you get, the more you're gonna save me money by that education, and you're gonna make me more money by that education, in a sense, because you know the job description.
Madam
So-
Chair, I just want to point out one thing. It's not based on the education, it's based on the duties. So if there are increased duties, complexity of the work, then that's where someone would move up, not based on their education.
If they
Most
can
of the time,
perform
Mark-
that duty,
Right.
doesn't matter what their
But most
education
of the time on that, I go get more education so I can have more duties and have more. So most of the time that I've seen, when you get education, you're getting more duties.
Correct,
So
but-
why would you get education if you didn't get more duties? Or you didn't get more stuff to do? Otherwise, I wouldn't go get the education, I'd stay, and then he could just
Right.
pay me on longevity and other things.
And we do that now as we train people and advance them through the different steps. We just may have to look at it through a different lens as to how we describe those steps. So,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Madam Chair. John, can I speak to you for a minute? When we met with each other, I asked you if there was a uniform form that they use for job descriptions, and it sounded like they're all over the board. And I think that's one of the things that we need to address is everybody uses the same form and for the job description and update those descriptions because those descriptions are directly related to what level you're going to be at.
Exactly. No, you're correct, Commissioner. So that's one of the projects this year as well, is to update and review all the job descriptions for the county to make sure we're using the same format. So what we've discovered is there's a variation. Some have been reviewed recently, some departments rewrote, as you heard Joe speak about it this morning, as we're looking at restructuring within the departments to make sure that we've got a career path and a progression. But one of those things has to be done this year, and that's make sure that those job descriptions are all current.
Well, how about,
Pardon me?
sorry, Ron, or John, to interrupt you. How about the 12 that we have nothing? So you said there's 12 that we really didn't have. Were they exempt ones? When you had,
You mean the 12 that we use market pricing for?
Those
I'm not sure.
Those weren't based on job descriptions, Commissioner. Those were based upon other positions. So we asked to look at specific positions, benchmark positions. There were some additional ones that they added to the survey. So instead of 40, they surveyed for 52 positions.
because we have different positions than.
Well,
40.
it's just to get some additional data to help us actually flesh out how the rest of the positions would fit together, if I understood the process correctly.
You did, yes. So John provided some job descriptions, and I just took a look at them, and we used market data just for those positions. They were not included in the customer survey.
So
I
how-
just threw that in.
So how do we figure out exempt? You work with the department heads in like 24/7 and different ones?
The
that we
exempt
don't-
status,
Yeah.
it's directly related to the bands. So if someone is an A or B, they are non-exempt. If they are C, D, E, or F, they would be exempt. So that is when we're looking specifically at the exemption test for the type of duties that are performed.
That it comes down to a duties, Commissioner. So there are federal guidelines that tell us what qualifies to be an exempt status or not. So those things are really closely tied to the different demands that are part of the system.
Okay,
Yes. Oh, good
I
question.
think we had, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
And Commissioner Ross, did I answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I understand this.
You
so
bet.
Of course.
I got a good footing as we go on.
I think Joe's got his question.
Joe, you got your question?
Couple of them. I spent an hour with you this morning.
I gotta ask the question that everybody in the audience is thinking, but not gonna ask. But so with all the ones that responded, I guess so we sent out surveys to all of these guys. Do you then receive the job descriptions to make sure they match, or are we? I mean, this is solely on HR to look at the job descriptions and make sure they match. There's no way for you guys to quantify that or fact check that is working.
I gotten this question before, Joe, when presenting, and unfortunately, no, we do not. We didn't get it from whatever county. For the other counties, we did not get all their job descriptions. When we've asked for that before, and we did a number of years ago, nobody responded. I mean, nobody, because it's a lot more work to do that. So, do I know specifically? Yes, this is the exact match. No, I don't. But what I look at is, let's look at the trend of the information and let's look and see if there is a cluster. That goes towards what I was talking about with the commissioners earlier. Like, if I see a huge variance in one of those salaries or several of those salaries, I will throw that out because it just looks way off.
Okay. And then the other one, do you want to go to this slide? I just want maybe for everybody in the audience.
You are just focused on that one.
Explain the difference because it was very confusing to me, Mark, when looking at this. Our average, it's slide 55.
All right.
Nope. Oh, right there.
There we go. Okay.
What number is ours, Holly, on that?
So with this slide,
Hold on, Mark.
yes, ma'am.
Finding and analysis. Finding.
It's the finding and analysis.
Mark, I
Starts
think
on
what needs to
slide
be done
40.
is to describe what that,
You're
I
on
will do so.
27 and 28.
each one of those columns actually
28,
represents.
commissioners. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
So with this slide, what it says is, here are the 52 different positions we gathered market information for. And that this slide here, oops, let me get that. The average annual salary, that's the average annual salary within the county. So that's that's where you guys are currently paying. If I need to, we can switch back to that other presentation, but that's the salary right now within the county.
Is the average annual.
Yes, ma'am. The 50th percentile, that goes towards what we gathered from the market. And you can see there are some positions where we didn't have enough responses. So we can't say, here's what the data shows. There's not many of them, but there's 1, 2, 5 of them. But as I mentioned, just because this highway maintenance worker, which is one we talked about a lot this morning, this shows, oh, okay, that's 10% below market. Okay. But when we get to the data, we said, all right, here's all the data that we had for all these positions. So 47 of the 52. Let's do a scatter plot of where the current salaries are. Here's where the 50th percentile of the market is. We put this highway maintenance worker as an A13 or a B21. Here's where that comes out within the scatter plot. Here are these other positions that are B21. Maybe some of them are right at market or even a little bit above. Okay, well, that's what that all looks like. And then after that, we run that line of best fit, the regression analysis through all the data. So just because that shows as 10% below market doesn't mean that the structure would be set at that 45,190, because there's other positions that are included within that that were at the same salary range that we internally evaluated the same. And then here's where the other positions across the organization were. So it's, we take a look not just at an average of all those B21s, but what were some of the other positions and where did that data fall out?
So like if you did foreman 29 and our average was 63, and so there'd be 10 foremans, and then our average out of those 10 were 63,485. Okay, then let me ask you something. If you're comparing it to the market or 50 percentile, maybe 8 of them been here for 10 years and 2 haven't. And then based on their market, do you see what I'm saying?
I see
Maybe
what you
their market is they have 5 new ones and 6 not new. So
Exactly.
maybe our market looks high because of, our employees stay longer or something like that. So, yeah.
Exactly. But we're not going to be able to get to that level of detail within this. So what we want to do
Okay.
is get enough data in general to draw some conclusions. That's what we were talking about before, having enough data, the more data points we get, the more accurate it is. So going back to this other survey,
So you'd find different organizations and they would have
they might have
basically,
the same
they might
distribution.
have 20 employees and 3 would be at the bottom, 3 would be higher, and in the
Correct.
middle, this is what they were paying them.
But even though, that may be the case, that 8 of them are super, super experienced.
Right.
And that's why there may be a difference there within.
The
when we
high
look-
and low.
Right, but it's also, okay, when we look at, again, these blue dots are all the dots for the county, for example. This is just a general example. This is
So you do that for each position, or you,
We do that for each position that we have market data for.
okay, so that's, okay, I was,
Yep, and those
Forgot
orange
about that.
dots are
Yep.
what we have for, for what the market is. So we have to plot all that, say, okay, here's what the market is for this. Here's where we're currently paid, here's what the market is for this. And then after that, that's when we
then
run
you
that
do the
line
math.
through. So
Okay.
it's, even though, for example, that highway maintenance worker is 10% below, maybe, so looking at this, that dot might be here, let's say. Oh, okay, but there's these other dots that we evaluate at the same level. Some are above, some might be a little bit closer to the market. But even with that, we have to run that line through everything.
So out of 52 positions, you did this analysis on every position to figure out what that level was to get that
5.
50% off.
Yep, it's actually 47 because we didn't have 5 of them. But yes, if you want, I can show you the exact slide that it's not the slide, but I have the data that we use specifically for Pennington County, where we have all the dots for this. But this is an example that I use often. But yes, this is what we did for all the positions that we got market data on. Here's where Pennington County is paying, here's where the market is, where do we evaluate those jobs, and that's what's down here along the bottom. This is all the DBM grades for everything. And then here's what it all looks like when we run that line through there.
Madam Chair.
For sure.
Mark, where do you lose your comfort level when that R2 drops? What level would that have to,
I set a threshold of 80%.
80? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Next question. John had a request for another municipality for our information. So there is value to that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could charge $10,000 for that detailed information.
Well, I mean, you could share your information, but here's where the value is for you filling that out.
Because there's a reciprocal with another county.
There is a reciprocal, but you guys fill that out, they're going to have different jobs that they're going to include in there. So they may ask for a sergeant. We didn't ask for a sergeant. You're going to get that market information now for that sergeant position. Or they might ask for a finance director, which you didn't ask for. Okay, now you're going to know the market for those positions. So, you're going to get additional market information by getting that, by completing that information.
I just wondered what the incentive for these other counties that we're not reciprocal, where they took the time to provide that information.
It helps them because then they can say, here's what the market is for these jobs based on some peer organizations. So, all right, we're paying high or low compared to that. Or maybe we need to do a survey. But you'll at least know here's what the market is.
Yeah.
Or any other questions from department heads, public?
I just got one comment.
I would have been surprised if you didn't come up, Janet.
Good morning, Janet Saylor, Treasurer. There are certain things that I'm not real clear on as far as the job descriptions, but John has guaranteed me that he will work with us, with Annette and I, to get to where we need to go on. And also, I had some concerns, and I had put those concerns in the 2021 packet that was requested by the board. And John has said that he would help me with those and help me bring them to the board. So my concerns are all in that packet that I did submit to the commissioners.
Thank you, Janet.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, you have some questions? No, you got this down?
So John, the packet that Janet talks about, is that the 2020
It's the goals.
goals? Okay.
Morning, Kevin Tone, Pennington County Sheriff. Just one question. We're meeting with Mark later this morning, so I'll save some of those questions for that. But one that everybody might be interested in, exempt versus non-exempt. We had some discussion about that on Friday when we met. And I have it confused maybe a little bit because we met previously with Mark, understood to depend upon where they fell on the scale as to whether they're exempt or non-exempt. And I've also been told that exempt versus non-exempt is a totally independent decision of where they're at on the scale. So could you help us understand exempt versus non-exempt and how that plays or doesn't play into this or in, so, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheriff. So the exempt versus non-exempt. Bands A and B are non-exempt. C, D, E, and F are exempt. And the exemption status is based on really the administrative test is the one you guys are almost always going to be using. The
Say, hold on just a sec, Mark.
Ma'am.
So non-exempt is A and B,
Yes, ma'am.
and exempt is
C,
C, D,
E, and
and E.
F.
That'd
And
be
it's
F.
the administrative exemption test that is applied of the Fair Labor Standards Act. What that says is to be exempt, you have to have independence and judgment on matters of significance to the organization. There are some other components to it as well, but that's kind of the heart of it.
Okay. That answer your question, Kevin?
Cheryl, did that answer your question? Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Morning, Madam Chair. Mark Bargo, Pennington County State's Attorney. I guess not so much a question as a concern. I want you guys to understand that it's certainly true that you've had a policy of allowing us to hire outside of the minimum after a month. And I think that Mark's suggestion is that we not require that first month. But I think you also need to understand that the compression that we'll be creating by this will also be extremely difficult because I can't bring somebody in, even if I need to for market reasons, and put them ahead of the people that are already there when they are of similar skill sets. And so it's certainly true that hypothetically I could do that, but I think that there's a very important distinction to be drawn between if we had that room at the bottom, if all of my people were going to be at that 5, 6, 7 level now, then maybe I could start people at a 3 or 4. So I'm concerned with having a system where step 1 isn't step 1, probably means that our cost numbers wouldn't be accurate anyway. If everybody's bringing people in at steps 3, 4, and 5, then the cost numbers we're being told aren't really going to be the cost numbers to the county. But I think we also need to look at the impact that we're going to have on other employees. And I've also, and I'll talk to John and Mark again, but I would like to know very much, particularly with relationship to my attorneys, the state's attorney and the deputy state's attorneys, where that data came from. And I'm not asking for the individual numbers, but to know which of those 13 people we deemed to be, 13 organizations that responded, we deemed to be analogous to what my folks are doing. Because I understand Mark says he just he accepts that when it comes back to him. But when you're saying your data is not great, but it's not terrible, I think I'm entitled to at least go look at some of the sources of that data.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Vargo. First, the compression issue is one that I did mention earlier, that is something to consider. As for being able to respond and say, here's who responded for those positions, unfortunately, that is, I can't provide that. I can't say, here's what the, everyone who responded for these 5 or 6 positions are. That becomes a little bit more protected information. I can say, here's what the responses were. Here's a number of organizations that responded for each of the positions. We had 4, 5, 6, 10, however many responded, but I'm not going to be able to tell you we had 6 respondents from, for these attorney positions, because that does become protected. That becomes very much a gray area.
Well, and I have to agree that if we didn't trust your data, if we didn't trust what you were doing, then, and you've done this long enough, then we shouldn't have hired a company. We should have probably just did our own data. So there's got to be a point where, because it's not what you like, that you don't trust it. So otherwise, we could do that across the board with everybody else, because everybody else doesn't believe this either, that this data isn't going to be correct for their people. I'm sorry, but again, then we shouldn't have done the study. We should have stayed where we're at and just said, okay, guys, no more razors, no more anything else, because we're not sustainable with the Condrey way we're doing it. So what was the solutions? So that's why we did this, is to try to make it equitable. When we also, some of that data might have been skewed because some people might have called Condrey or changed the Condrey study in a sense by telling Condrey that that wasn't quite correct. So then they ended up putting this study and the Condrey study at risk because then it didn't become equitable all the way across the board. Some people were paid more, some people weren't. And based on that data, then it wasn't fair and equitable in that study. So now we're saying that this is not fair and equitable by Mark Vargo's standards because he needs to see the study. I don't think so. I think we have to trust this company and then try to find the solutions from there. That's my point of view. I'm 1 of 5.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Ron.
Mark, in your study, did you find anything unique about Pennington County compared to some of the other counties that you use for comparables? Because the demographics here are a little unique in some ways.
Well, Commissioner, when we looked at who we were choosing as peer organizations, we were very mindful in terms of picking organizations which were roughly comparable. So, when we were looking at the respondents, I didn't see anything that really stood out, but we certainly weren't going to choose a comparable organization that was massively different. Some might have, different numbers of commissioners or different structures in terms of their attorney's office or their highway. You're not going to be able to get that level of granularity. If you're looking for, well, here's the match because they have an attorney's office that processes a similar number of cases as us, you're not going to be able to get that. Or you're not going to be able to get that level of detail and have enough data to really draw conclusions. Does that answer your question?
If there's anything, I know it's hard to find the perfect data set, but I just wondered if there's anything that you found about Pennington County that was unique compared to other counties.
Pennington County is unique in many, many ways, but the data, we did not find anything that stood out within the data.
Thank you.
Commissioner LaCroix.
I guess my initial response after today and some of the meetings that I had is I kind of support the quicker way to get to the midpoint, the 7-year plan, for the simple fact that, and I support the 2021 part of starting it so that we can get the people that are here moved up there faster and we can start how we want to do the programming and do the performance once the mid-range, because I think we got a good set of employees to do that. That's just my initial response right here today. I mean, that could change beyond, but from what I heard today, that's what I'm more looking at.
Thank you. Any other questions? John, do you have anything to share that we missed today? All right, board. We have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Moved by Gary. Mr. Drews.
Second.
Second by LaCroix. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mark.